The wind picked up like it was angry with the land, rattling through dry branches and pushing tumbleweeds across the rutted trail behind her. Josephine's wedding dress, once white, now clung heavy and gray to her thighs, damp with sleet and streaked in mud. The hem had torn back miles ago. She didn't care. Not when the sound of her own breathing was the only thing left to listen to. She rode side saddle no longer, straddling the borrowed bay like a man, skirt bunched up, legs aching. The mare snorted, ears back against the cold. They were hours out from Red Hollow, and the storm was setting in hard and fast, like vengeance come to earth. Snow fell in sudden, sharp waves, blinding her to the ridgeline ahead. Behind her there was nothing, no riders, no preacher, no groom, no second chances offered from that cursed little town where her heart had broken in two beneath the white chapel eaves. She hadn't packed much. A stolen flask, half a loaf of bread, and a pistol that belonged to her mother before cholera took her in the night. She didn't know where she was going, only that the road ahead, however cruel, was hers now. The storm turned from threat to presence. Snow thickened, wind howled, branches cracked and toppled in the canyon. Her fingers, stiff with cold, tightened on the reins. The mare stumbled once, caught itself. Josephine whispered something low, a sound more than a word, meant to soothe them both. It was dusk by the time she saw the cabin. At first she mistook it for a rock outcropping, something natural and unkind. But the chimney smoke betrayed it, thin, almost unwilling but real. A curl of warmth against the dying sky. She didn't hesitate. Her body had long passed the point of choosing. She nudged the mare forward, past a fallen pine, up the slope toward whatever waited there. The cabin was squat and silent, cedar walls dark with wet and age. No glass in the window, just oilskins stretched taut. A woodpile stacked neat, no other sign of life but the smoke told her someone was home. She dismounted and staggered to the door. Knocked once, knuckles barely making sound. Then again, harder, no answer. She pushed it open. Inside was a dimness like the inside of a cave, but warmer. A fire burned low in the hearth, more ember than flame. The walls were hung with hides, old tools, bones. A single bed, unmade, table with a knife stuck in it. The air held the faint smells of tobacco, venison, pine tar. And in the farthest shadow a man. He was tall, seated on a stool near the fire, watching her with eyes that didn't blink. His beard was grizzled but trimmed. His hair long, tied back. His clothes were leather, rough-spun, worn at the seams. Not young, but not so old as she might have guessed. Josephine stepped inside without asking. She couldn't speak at first. Her jaw trembled from cold or fear or something older. The man stood, slow, deliberate. "You're a long way from anything," he said, voice like a rusted hinge. She looked at him, still half shaking, soaked to the bone. "I need shelter." He nodded once without question or kindness and turned to the hearth. "You can warm yourself by the fire, water in the pot." She moved like a ghost, shedding the worst of her wet things, laying them by the hearth. Her dress steamed where it touched the stone. He watched her, not with hunger but with wariness, like a man who's seen wolves dressed in finer lace than hers. "What's your name?" he asked. "Josephine." He took a slow breath and added another log to the fire. "Name's Elias." She nodded, curled herself close to the heat, and tried not to cry. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, something else stirred. Not danger, not yet. But something not quite still. Elias didn't ask what had driven her to ride straight into the heart of a mountain storm in her wedding dress. And Josephine didn't offer it. Not yet. Not while the fire still burned and the cold was still leaving her bones. Whatever tale she had to tell, it would have to wait until she believed she might live to finish it. Morning came slow and colorless, with light that seeped through the cracks in the oilskin window like pale milk. The storm had not passed, but turned softer, more sullen than violent, snow still falling steady over the ridgeline. Josephine woke on the floor by the fire, wrapped in an old wool blanket that smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. Her back ached, her feet burned where the warmth had returned to them too quickly. The mare, she remembered suddenly, was still outside. She staggered to the door and unlatched it. Snow had risen nearly to the threshold, soft as sifted flour. The mare stood tethered beneath the overhang, shivering but alive. Elias must have done that. She hadn't. When she stepped back inside, he was waiting with a tin cup in one hand and a strip of jerky in the other. "You ought to eat," he said. She took both, nodded once in thanks. The water was warm, not tea, not broth, but it went down easy. Her mouth still ached from where she'd bitten it in the wind. Elias didn't sit. He moved around the cabin like a man half accustomed to sharing space but not trusting it. He didn't ask her questions. He didn't offer apologies. He merely existed, and in that existence made room for her. Hours passed that way. The fire crackled, snow piled. Elias skinned a rabbit out back and returned with blood on his hands, muttering something about traps and luck. Josephine helped clean the meat without being asked. Her mother had taught her enough. Her sleeves were rolled, arms scarred, and she didn't flinch at the knife or the blood. Later, as twilight settled in again, she sat cross-legged on the floor, watching the snow filter down in the windowlight. "I was left," she said suddenly. Elias looked up from the kettle he was stirring. "Left where?" "Altar Red Hollow. He said all the right things till it mattered. Then he didn't show." Elias said nothing, only handed her a tin bowl of stew. She took it, held it close. He rode off that morning, took his own horse, took the preacher's too. A corner of Elias' mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile. "You chased him." "I chased not being that girl." She lifted her chin, though the words ached to say. "The pitiful one, the one everyone whispers about in the mercantile. I wasn't gonna stay and let them look at me like that." Elias nodded once. "So you became the one they'll whisper about for riding into a blizzard." Josephine looked at him then, truly looked. "I'd rather be a legend than a pity." Elias let out a slow breath, something between understanding and wariness. The night deepened. She helped with the washing. They spoke little. Silence filled the space between them like snow in the branches, quiet, weighty, alive. Before bed, Elias pointed to the loft. "You can sleep up there, it's warmer." She climbed the ladder without thanks, not out of rudeness but out of caution. There were still things she didn't know, still instincts that hadn't quieted. The world was not so kind that a woman could trust a man on kindness alone. From the loft, she could hear him moving below. Boots scuffing wood, the rattle of tools. Once a long, dragging sigh like he'd been holding it all day. She curled into the blanket and stared at the slanted roof beams. Something about him didn't sit right. Not danger exactly, but a weight, like grief soaked into the very boards of the floor. There was a silence in him that didn't feel empty but buried. She would stay, for now, until the storm passed, until she could find another path forward, but she would watch him closely. Because men like Elias didn't live alone in the mountains without reason, and she had learned, painfully, that even kindness came with a cost. Days passed without ceremony. The storm lingered like a guest overstaying its welcome, snow layering itself over the cabin roof, the trees bowed heavy beneath it. The world outside had hushed to a slow, relentless white. Inside, time stretched. Josephine rose early, fed the mare, chopped wood until her shoulders throbbed. Elias never asked her to. He just watched, then quietly began leaving the axe leaned near the door instead of putting it back. He hunted most mornings, gone before she stirred, returning with quail or rabbit or nothing at all. She mended a torn curtain with thread she found in a tin. She salted meat. She cleaned tools. They worked in tandem, rarely speaking, and yet the rhythm grew familiar. Trust didn't come, but a kind of truce did. He never entered the loft, never touched her things. There was no leering, no suggestion. That unsettled her more than if there had been. He was hiding something. It was in the way he flinched when she knocked over a pan, the way he stiffened when she asked about the scars on his forearms. Long, narrow, old. She knew the marks of manacles when she saw them. One night, while he carved a piece of bone into the shape of a hawk, she asked, "What brought you here?" His knife slowed, not stopped but slowed. War ended, peace didn't. That was all he said. Josephine didn't push. She knew the sound of locked doors in a man's voice. But the question stayed between them like a candle neither dared snuff. That same evening, as wind clawed at the roof and the cold deepened sharp, Josephine lay restless beneath the rafters, listening. Elias was below, stoking the fire. She could hear the scrape of metal, the slow shift of the kettle. And then music, not loud, a soft, hesitant hum, no words, just a low, broken melody, fragile as moth wings. She eased down the ladder without a sound. He didn't notice her at first, sitting cross-legged on the floor, cradling something in his lap. It was a fiddle. The varnish was worn to dullness, the bow frayed at the edge. But the way he held it, tender, almost reverent, told her everything. He played a few notes, faltered, then stopped. Josephine leaned against the wall. "I thought I'd forgotten what music felt like," she said, voice low. Elias looked up, startled but not angry. "Used to play, long time ago." She stepped closer. "Play more." He hesitated, eyes dark beneath the shadow of his brow. Then, with a breath like surrender, he raised the bow again. The tune he chose was slow, old, something aching with memory. It wound through the cabin like smoke, threading into the corners of her heart, where names and faces she hadn't spoken aloud in years still lived. Her father's humming voice on the porch, her brother dancing her around the fire the night before he left for Kansas, her mother singing lullabies between coughs. When he stopped, neither of them moved for a while. "That was beautiful," she said. "It was hers," he replied. A silence fell, heavy, not mournful, more like something sacred. She didn't ask who she was. Not yet. The next day, the sun broke through for the first time in a week. The snow crusted hard in the light, trees glittering like glass spun by God's own hand. Elias ventured farther with his rifle, and Josephine wandered the perimeter of the clearing. She found snare lines, chopped stumps, signs of old fires long gone cold, and she found a grave. It was marked only with a flat stone, no name. But the dirt was older, the ground settled deep. Nearby, a locket hung from a nail driven into a tree, tarnished gold, swinging gently in the wind. Josephine didn't touch it. That night, she didn't mention what she'd seen. Elias didn't ask about her wandering. But they sat closer by the fire than they had the night before, and when she climbed the ladder to the loft, she glanced back once. Elias was watching the flames like he was listening to a voice only he could hear. Spring announced itself in silence. It came not with flowers or birdsong, but with the subtle melt of snow, the damp scent rising from thawing earth, the groan of ice releasing its grip on the cabin roof. Sap ran in the trees. The world breathed again. Josephine stood outside one morning, her boots sunk ankle-deep in slush, eyes turned toward the ridgeline. The sky was pale and clean, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she didn't shiver. Elias joined her with 2 mugs of coffee, handed one over without a word. They drank in companionable quiet, watching the mare nose at patches of wet grass. Josephine hadn't mentioned leaving in weeks, not since the night of the fiddle. Not since she'd found the grave. She had begun to learn his patterns, the subtle cadence of his days, how he rubbed the scar on his wrist when he was lost in thought, how he knelt to whisper to his snares like they might listen better if spoken to gently. She learned how to move in the space he offered, not taking more than he gave but not shrinking from it either. And Elias, for his part, had begun to look her in the eye more often. He still didn't smile, not really, but something softened in him when she laughed. When she told him stories about her childhood, about her father teaching her to shoot tin cans off the fence, about sneaking pies from the preacher's windowsill, he listened like he was storing it all away. That day they butchered a deer together. Josephine held the hide taut while Elias worked the blade. Blood pooled in the snow, vivid and steaming. They didn't speak, didn't need to. Later, she cleaned the knife, wiped the bone handle smooth. Something had shifted between them. A quiet trust, not declared, just worn in like the crease of old leather. That night, as they sat by the fire, she asked, "Was it your wife?" Elias didn't flinch. He didn't lie either. "Yes." She waited. "She died the second winter, fever. I buried her behind the cabin." Josephine nodded, sipping from her cup. "The locket." "Her sister, sent from back east. She never took it off." The fire crackled. "I found it," she said, voice soft. "Didn't touch it." "I know," he murmured. They sat in silence for a long time. Elias added another log to the fire, slow, deliberate. Then he said, "I wasn't always alone, had a unit, 26th Illinois, fought at Shiloh. I was a chaplain, if you can believe that." Josephine blinked. "I can," she said after a moment. He chuckled low. "Afterward, I couldn't carry it anymore, the grief, the questions, so I came here, built something quiet. Something that didn't ask. Until I knocked on your door." He looked at her then, eyes tired but steady. "You didn't ask, you survived. There's a difference." Josephine's throat tightened. She looked away. He set down his cup, hands folded between his knees. You could leave now. Roads'll clear soon. You've got no debt here. She looked at the fire, the way it flickered gold against the log walls. She thought of Red Hollow, of the preacher's stunned face, of the whispers. She thought of her empty ring finger and the ache in her chest that had stopped feeling like shame and started feeling like space. I don't owe you, she said. But I might want to stay. Elias didn't answer right away. He studied the fire like it might tell him something he didn't already know. You'd be safe here, he said at last. And not just safe, she added. He met her gaze, the firelight catching the silver in his beard. No, not just that. They didn't touch, didn't need to, but when she rose to climb the ladder that night, she paused. He stood as if by instinct and handed her the blanket she always forgot. Their fingers brushed, and in that brief moment something unspoken passed between them, not a promise, not yet, but the beginning of one. The thaw brought color back to the land. Buds swelled on the branches. Streambeds ran loud with meltwater, cutting ribbons through the forest floor. Birds returned, shy at first, their song tentative as if unsure whether to trust the stillness. And with the change came work. Elias repaired the chicken coop out back, though there hadn't been chickens in it for years. Josephine built new shelves along the east wall of the cabin. They didn't talk about it, but they were making room for the living, room for the future. She had found an axe head in the shed, rusted but solid, and spent a day grinding it clean by the fire. Her hands ached by sundown, but the metal shone again. Elias said nothing when he saw it, only handed her a length of hickory to shape into a handle, his way of approving. Some days he'd disappear for hours, returning with fish or news of tracks deeper in the hills. She never asked where he went. She only listened when he returned. He spoke more now. Not often, but with less weight, like the words didn't cost him as much. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the last snow patches retreat into the shadows, Elias said, "You never asked what I did." Before. Josephine glanced at him. Didn't need to, but I figured it wasn't preaching. He smirked. After the war, I took work escorting freight between towns, guarding wagons. Didn't much like folks, but I could shoot straight and I kept to myself. She nodded. So how'd you end up in the hills? Elias took a long breath, eyes on the tree line. One job went bad, real bad, group of settlers. I was supposed to get them to a mining camp up near Cold Creek. Ambush hit us crossing a gulch. Only 2 made it out, me and a girl no older than 16. His jaw clenched. Wasn't enough, I should have done more. Should have known better. Josephine didn't offer comfort, she let him speak. She didn't last the week, fever like my wife. I buried her with the others. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was sacred, like the space between prayers. She reached over, rested her hand on his. Light, steady. You carry it, she said. You don't have to carry it alone. He turned his palm up beneath hers, held on. Later that week, while digging in the soft ground near the edge of the clearing, Josephine struck something hard. She knelt, cleared away the dirt. A small iron lockbox, its hinges swollen with age. She pried it open with the heel of her boot. Inside were papers, letters, a faded photograph of a woman, young, sharp-eyed, standing beside a cabin that wasn't this one but close in shape. And at the bottom, folded neat, a map. She showed it to Elias that night. His face changed when he saw it. Not alarm, not exactly. This was hers, he said. We plan to go north, start again, Oregon Territory, new land. Clean slate. He ran his thumb over the map, slow. I forgot about this. Josephine studied him. Do you still want that? A new start. He didn't answer at first, but then, with a voice rough from memory, he said, I don't think I ever stopped. She looked at him in the firelight, this man who had given her silence, safety, space to mend. And for the first time since Red Hollow, she felt her heart move toward something not born of pain. We could go, she said, careful but sure. Elias looked at her like she was something found after being long lost. I'd go with you, he said. It wasn't a vow, it wasn't grand, but it was true, and for Josephine that was more than enough. Still, the mountain held secrets, and peace never came without asking what price it demanded, and the price was coming. Just beyond the ridgeline, The rider came at dawn. Josephine saw him first from the bluff above the pasture, where she'd gone to fetch a pail of snowmelt. A dark speck on the lower trail, steady, deliberate, not the pace of a lost traveler. The pace of someone who knew exactly where they were headed. She set the pail down slow, every hair on her arms lifting with warning. The mare raised her head in the linta below, uneasy. By the time she reached the cabin, Elias was already at the doorway, rifle slung across his shoulder. He'd seen it too. One, she asked. One, he confirmed. Josephine didn't ask how he knew trouble when he saw it. She knew it too. Some things didn't need speaking. They didn't run. Elias didn't believe in fleeing shadows, and Josephine had outrun her ghosts once already. This time, she stood her ground. The rider reached the clearing near midday. He was lean, young, wrapped in a long coat dusted with road and river crossings. His face was sharp as a hawk's, lips set, eyes unreadable. He dismounted slow, hands visible. "Afternoon," he called, voice smooth. Elias stepped onto the porch, rifle still in plain sight. Josephine stood behind him, her hand resting near the doorframe, where the pistol waited just out of view. "Afternoon," Elias replied. The rider looked them both over. Paused at Josephine's face. Recognition flickered. "You're a hard woman to track, Miss Kane." The name struck like a crack of lightning. No one had spoken it since Red Hollow. Josephine didn't move. "Who sent you?" "Name's Clive," he said, ignoring her question. "Hired to collect something or someone." "You come for me?" Elias asked, his voice like dry gravel. Clive shook his head, casual. "Not unless you give me reason." He turned his gaze back to Josephine. "Your fiancé's uncle says you took something when you fled, a ring worth more than most houses." Josephine's breath caught. She reached into her pocket and drew the object out, held it up between her fingers. The ring glinted in the sunlight, small, plain, nothing special to look at. But the diamond was real, her mother's, passed down through blood and sorrow. "This was mine before it was his," she said. "Let him come say otherwise." Clive shrugged. "I don't care about the ring, I care about being paid." Elias stepped forward. "She's under my roof." "That means something, old man." Elias didn't answer. But he raised the rifle a fraction. Josephine's voice came steady behind him. "You've ridden this far, stay the night. Eat, then ride back and tell whoever's waiting they've lost interest." Clive hesitated. "I don't aim to be unreasonable," she added, "but I'm not going back, not now, not ever." Clive studied her a long moment. Then, with a faint shake of his head, he turned to his horse. "Storm's moving in behind me," he muttered. "If it's food and shelter, I won't argue." That night was quiet, tense. Clive took a corner of the cabin, rifle by his side, eyes open longer than they needed to be. Elias slept lightly, Josephine not at all. By morning, snow dusted the grass again, a last breath of winter before spring's full claim. Clive mounted without a word, the ring untouched. He didn't say where he'd go, or if he'd lie, or if silence was its own price. He only looked once at Josephine. "You ride hard for a bride," he said. "Hope he was worth the running." She met his gaze. "He was, that's why I ran." And then he was gone. Afterward, Elias went to mend the fence by the far trees. Josephine walked to the edge of the clearing, the ring still in her palm. She buried it at the foot of the locket tree, deep enough no one would find it again. That evening, Elias sat by the fire, map spread on the table. She joined him, fingertip tracing the dotted lines west. "Still want to go?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she laid her hand on his. "We already did," she said, "the minute we stayed." Elias looked at her, long and full. Outside, the wind carried the smell of thawing earth and pine. Birds sang without caution. The mare nickered in her stall. Inside, the cabin held their shadows on the walls, not as wounds, but as roots.